Good to have you back again. Welcome back to the channel. So in this lesson, I'm going to go through simple interest and future value of any investments that uses simple interest. And before I go on, make sure at any given moment you feel that you need to pause the video, rewind the video. You need to do that. All right, let's go ahead and start with the concept of interest. So the concept of interest is the cost of borrowing money. The concept of interest is the cost of borrowing. Now, it could be money that you're borrowing, a cost of service that you're borrowing, but in this context, we're just going to talk about money. And there are two types of interest. One is simple interest right here. That's a simple interest right there. And the next one is compound interest. And today we're going to just focus on simple interest and everything to do with simple interest. And then another video, I'll go into compound interest in depth. I will make a quick differentiation between the two in this lesson as well. So simple interest is the amount of money earned or paid only on an initial, or is called the principal invested or borrowed funds. And that has to happen over a period of time. And in this case, you are only responsible to pay or receive interest based on the original amount that you put in or you borrowed. So if you borrowed, let's say $1,000, let's do an example. If you borrowed $1,000 at, let's say 5%, let's say the bank gives you that. Well, the bank will say, okay, we'll give you 5% of your 1,000. Doesn't matter how many years you have it in there. For every year is based on the annual contract, or it could be shorter than that, but usually it's an annual. And they give you 5% of $1,000 back, and that is 5% of 1,000. That is $50. And I'm hoping that you guys know how to do that. You change the percentage to decimal, and you multiply by 1,000, you get 50. Now, if you go to the next year, you do the same thing. So even though your money is still in there and now your total money is $1,050, let's suppose you didn't cash out the $50 interest, your second year, this is year 2, the bank will still gives you 5%, but this 5% only is based on the original 1,000, not the 1,050 that you now have at the beginning of the second year. So you're still going to make $50. And that's the basis for simple interest. Very straightforward. Compound interest, in contrast, is the amount on the initial invested or loan and all the accumulated interest from the previous period on top of that. So that's the only difference that the compound interest and the simple interest have, and that is that concept of compounding means that you basically earn interest over interest on top of the original principal. We're not going to get into that too much in this lesson. That is all I'm going to talk about. Okay. So let's look at first of all, a couple of terminologies so I can't assume that you know. When we're talking about interest, we always talk about interest rate. Now, yes, it is true. We're talking about amount here, okay? We're talking simple interest is the amount earned. But in terms of calculations, we have to work with interest rate. And interest rate is basically a percentage of the initial amount invested or loan. So in this case, it's 5% of the original, okay? So this 5% right here, as an example that I gave, is 5% of the original $1,000. And that's how they use it. So 5%, and there's a time specific to that initial investment. So for example, banks or loans, they give you, okay, the rate is such and such, let's say 5%, and is annually, that means once a year. And once a year, they pay you 5% based on the initial investment, or it could be in different types of products and financial product. They could be like 4% monthly. So this is the term. You see, this becomes monthly instead of annually. And then we're going to deal with that too. How does that work? Means every month they give you 6.25% instead of every year. So obviously this is more favorable. And this is how we talk about interest amount in terms of interest rate. And of course, we can come up with a value and a formula of it. And notice what is happening on that example that I just gave you. Let's do an example again with the $1,000. So we got the 1,000, and we want to get that 5% simple interest for is the annually per year, and the interest amount, let's call it I for interest. Okay, so I is the interest amount. I'm going to put it interest dollar. All right. So basically, is the initial amount 1,000, and this 1,000 you multiply it by the rate, which is 5%. Now we write it 5%, but actually you have to change the form from percentage to decimal. So that would be times 0.05. And so this is the initial amount, 1,000. This is the rate in decimal form, and then you'll end up getting your $50. So if it was 2 years, so this is year one. Let's say this is just only for 1 year, only 1 year. But if it was for the second year, so for 2 years, what would you do? Well, this is $1,000, right? You multiply it by 5%, but whatever you get, you have to again multiply it by 2 because there are 2 years, not 1. So in this case, you'll get 2 times 50, which is equal to $100. And from this point on, we can come up with the actual formula. Now let's define these terms like the initial amount, the interest rate, and the interest amount, the time. So here are the variables for the calculation of the simple interest. I for interest amount, P is the initial amount. They call them principal amount in finance. When you start an amount, that's called the principal amount. R is for interest rate. T is the duration of the investment or loan. You can actually think of it as time spent. Okay. And when you have this, notice that every time we have gone from the 1 year to second year, we can also do the 3 year. You notice that you just multiply whatever the value is, the principal times the rate by that year. So in here was 2, in here was 1, right? So times 1, that was that one. So the formula for this, the interest rate for simple interest rate, is the initial amount principal times the rate, the interest rate that is given, times the time that is spent in that investment, the duration. Okay. Now, the time could be anything from seconds to years and decades and centuries. Okay. And we need to make sure that we are using a proper time ratio here so that it represents it. According to this formula, this time, the t here, if it's any year that is greater than 1, you just plug the number in there. So if it's 2 years, you put 2 in there. If it's 1.5 year, you put 1.5 in there. If it's 200, you put 200 in there. But you just put it in into the formula and then do the calculation. Now the formula that I like the most is this one, where time is less than a year. If time invested is less than a year, you use this formula, P times R times T over T. Okay, let's look at this example. You've got the principal amount 2,000. I've got this table for you, and the principal amount is right here where you start in year 1, and then simple interest rate is 3%, and the total amount is what you start with plus the interest amount. We call that accumulated amount or total amount, but in finance they call them accumulated amount. And then we want to know what the total interest earned was every year, and then every second year, and we add them all up. Okay, and then we go from there. All right, so let's just fill in the table and then come back. Now make sure that when you're doing the simple interest calculation is the 2,000 times, and then you have to change the percentage to decimal, and that would be, and then you multiply. So this would be 3 times 2,000 as $60, and then the total amount will be $2,060 because we are adding 2,060. Okay, that's the total amount. All right, and now we can go ahead and do that again. Now remember, in simple interest, we really don't care how much money at the end you have, which is 2060 at the end of the first year. The amount that you're being paid is based on the original amount, which is the principal amount. This $2,000 stays constant, okay? That doesn't change. So let's do that. I'm just going to write them all up. But I'm just going to do one more example, and then we're going to stop after that. So let's do again, we're going to do the calculation, and then you're going to end up getting 2060, but this is 2060 because remember the $60 shows up, but then you have added another $60. Okay, so that would be 2120. That's total amount that you make. But at this year 2, you also make 60, but in totality, the total interest you make 120 because these two are added, right, on the second year. So if you leave it there for 2 years, you have $120 simple interest out of your $2,000. All right, and then so forth and so on. And notice that we can come up with a formula for the accumulated amount or the total amount. So A is the accumulated amount or total amount, and that is P plus I, the original principal, plus the interest. Or if you want to really write it all up in terms of what I was, remember I was P times R times T over capital T, or you can just leave it as T if T is 1 year. The same formula to solve for all other variables. Now suppose you want to solve for P, the principal amount. Well, this would be I on top divided by R times T. Okay, that would be another. Suppose you want to solve for T, the time it takes for a principal to be accumulated to a certain amount and gives you the interest amount. So this would be I on top again, P R, the principal times the rate. Okay, and last one is if you want to solve for the rate, and the same thing, I is on top, and that would be P times T. Okay, and remember, the rate has to be in percentage. So once you get the calculation done and rate shows up as a decimal number, you need to change that to percentage. Okay, and I'm hoping that you know how to do that by now. If you don't, check out my Math 9, changing decimal to percentage or percentage to decimal. I'm going to put a card on this video at one point, so make sure that you do the review on that. Click on that and I'll walk you through it step by step. It's a good 5 minutes lesson from grade 9, and you know what that is. All right, let's look at this question. We have a principal amount $500. We got the rate 4.5%, but this time it is a simple interest, but it's not annual simple interest. This is semi-annual simple interest. Okay, so every 6 months you get this interest rate. And the time, you want to leave it for 2 years. We want to know what the interest amount is. We want to know the total amount. This is kind of a tricky question, but stay focused and you'll see what's happening here. The interest formula was PRT. Is that okay? And if you remember, I changed the T with the T over capital T, but I'm not going to put it down here right now, but I want to just explain what's happening. This interest is coming in semi-annually. That means every 6 months, right? So you can actually put the T, the actual time that you have, which is 2 years, over the actual base T, which is 6 months here. But once you put 6 months here, you have to change the T unit from year to months, right? So if I rewrite this, I get I equal to P is 500 times the rate. Now change the percentage to decimal, 0.045, times, I have the 2 years on top, but I can't put 2 years and a month. I have to change either the top to month or the bottom to year, whichever you like to do. So if you want to change the top, I just chose the month in the bottom, so I have to change 2 years to month. Now 2 years, that's 24 months over 6, okay? And you do the math and see what happens. And you get $90. Okay. So now that's total interest that you got. What is the total amount? Well, you started with $500. So the total amount, the cumulative amount, is equal to your $500 plus the $90. And now you got $590 at 4.5%, but you're getting the simple interest semi-annually. That means every 6 months. Annually means once a year. So if it's once a year, this denominator will end up being 1, and it's based on the year, so you leave it as year. If this was monthly, you leave the bottom, you have to leave it in terms of month. It makes it easier. And if it's daily, the denominator should be in terms of day. That represents the base of your simple interest term. Okay. And that's what will be. Okay. I hope you found this useful. Come back again for more math.